So let's talk about 4 things that I find extremely important for your fantasy draft. And let's go over it before I dive in. First thing you need to know is about your scoring. Like, how's your league going to score the touchdowns and receptions, and what's the value of each position points wise? Number 2, you need to know how your roster construction is. That dictates on how you draft as well. Then you have to visit the draft room, and you got to really know what in the world you're doing, because on draft day, which most of you guys will be drafted online, there's a little ticker that's from like 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and it goes by so much faster than you think. You need to know what's going on. And then the last thing, a few tips on how to prep. So hopefully you're not watching this video right before you draft. So let's dive right into it. First thing I said was scoring. You'll see here I brought up the Sleeper app. It's something that Sean and I love to use, and it's probably one of the number 1 platforms out there. So don't make fun of what you see here. That is not me flexing in the corner. That's The Rock. But this is my super flex league. But one of the things you need to do is be able to navigate the website so you can figure out where everything's laid out, scoring and all that stuff that you need to know. So you click on the league settings here, and it pops up here on Sleeper, and I'm going to just go down to scoring settings. Now, why is scoring settings so important? Because you need to know how the scoring is for receivers. PPR, points per reception, all right, is that full or half point? So you go to the scoring settings. Let's go to receiving. So where do I find out that PPR scoring? It's in here, the receptions. Is it 1 point, full point PPR, or you'll see something that says half point. So it's 0.5 in the box. You're like, Chris, what's that mean? It really values different positions based off the points there. So if it's point per reception, receivers are valued higher. All right, so that's something you need to look at. A half point PPR is something that is more widely used because it evens the playing field out. So the running backs and the receivers are a little bit closer, but it gives you more value to the receivers. Or some people put 0 points in there, and it's what we call old school standard scoring league. All right, and then you want to look at touchdown value. 6 for receiving, 6 for rushing. That is pretty stock on every single website that you play for, but passing is where it can be different. If a passing touchdown is 4, that's pretty normal. If you're at 6 points, you're at a place where the quarterback value will rise a little bit higher because of what total scoring they can provide you. All right, guys, now we're going to dive into the roster construction and why that's so important when you're preparing for a draft. Here, when you go to your homepage, and it's usually going to pull up here on the drafts tab on Sleeper, you just go over to team. Just hit team, and you're going to look at, hey, these are all the roster positions that I have to fill on draft day. All right, it goes all the way down to bench and injured reserve, but you got starters, and that's what you're really looking for to start out. Now, look at indicators here. We've got quarterback, we've got running back, we got wide receiver, we have tight end, we have WRT, or WRTQ, and in some leagues that might read as flex. If you got a flex spot, that is a wide receiver, running back, tight end. All right. If you have a super flex, that is wide receiver, running back, tight end, and quarterback. That's a whole different level. It'll blow your mind when you play. Basically, it's a 2 quarterback league that you're starting 2 QBs in. But let's bring it back down. Don't want to overwhelm you guys. So when I'm looking here, when I jump into a brand new league, the value of how I draft positions, particularly running back and wide receivers, all right? We already talked about scoring. Is it PPR or half point PPR? But after that, I want to see how many guys I got to start in the lineup in those 2 positions. All right, so I'm looking, it's pretty standard, 2 running back and then 3 receivers. Some older roster constructions might be 2 running back, 2 receivers, and that values the running back a little bit more. But when you look at the starting spots and you see 2 RBs and 3 wide receivers, so I'm not looking at the flex right now, I'm thinking ahead, I've got 3 wide receiver starting spots that I need to fill. And you're like, Chris, why does that matter? So don't even look at the flex position here. Early in drafts, running back and wide receivers tend to go in the first 3 to 4 rounds. Tight ends once in a while, but running back, wide receivers are the positions you pick early. Now, let's say first 3 rounds, you go 3 running backs. Like, okay, I'm strong at running back. What's so wrong with that, Chris? Well, yes, you fill your 2 RB spots in your flex, but those 3 wide receivers positions that you need to play a player in every weekend to start, you're weak at that position. You want to get some of the better receivers early on too, because you need to fill your starting spot with great talent. Now, you build your team in the draft, and you don't win or lose your league in the draft, but bad drafting can lose you the league early. So if you neglect wide receivers early on when you need to start 3 of them, that can really, really hurt. So it's good to know 2 running back, 3 receivers in the starting lineup, or 2 running back, 2 wide receivers in your starting lineup, because if it's 3 receivers, I'm going to value wideouts more. If it's 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, I'm going to probably just keep going with running back there early on, because I have less to fill in my starting spots. Now that we got scoring down and the roster setup down, we got all this information. Why do I need to know this? I'm going to show you why. Because we're going to enter the draft room and we're going to figure out how your draft's laid out. It's extremely important to visit this before the first draft. If you're only seeing the draft room on draft night, you're going to be overwhelmed and you're going to make mistakes early. And it's going to benefit all your other league mates, because you probably would mess up a pick or 2. But let's be prepared before we jump in. So I'm using Sleeper, best format out there for fantasy football, but ESPN, Yahoo had the same thing. When you go to your homepage, again, this is what Sleeper brings up when I go to my homepage. I'm going to look for mock draft. All right, you can hit draft room, but I go into mock draft. So when we click on mock draft, boom, it should pop up here. This is the mock draft room. I have no drafts going on right now. 2 ways to add it in here. You can hit this little icon that says new mock draft, or a plus button. On the websites of any other platforms you use, it'll tell you where you can jump into a one that you already have, all right, that's in progress, or let's make a new one like we see here. Hit that plus sign. I jump into the mock draft. Whoa, ton of things on your screen. It's pretty cool, but if you're a first-time player, this is pretty overwhelming. So over here on the right, in any league site, you're going to see a place where you can kind of hit settings. And you want to do this, you want to make sure the league is set up the way your actual league is set up. And that's where roster comes into position, and scoring. So I jump into draft settings, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to help set up my league. Now, here in general settings, snake draft's pretty obvious here. Not too many people do linear. That's just wrong. All right, and I'll show you why snake draft is popular. Now remember, half point or full point PPR. PPR, points per reception. Standard means there's no value per reception. Those are old school leagues. Get out of it if you can. But yeah, points PPR. 1 full point per PPR. That's this one. And then you have half point PPR. This is pretty standard, so I'm going to choose this. Okay. Now, how many teams are in your league? Is it a 10 team, an 8 team? I've seen those. Is it 14? I hate being in those leagues. Those are tough. But I'm going to choose 12. Most of my leagues are 12. Over here, it don't really matter. Time per pick, I think it's usually 2 minutes. But if you know that information about your draft, put it in there, because after I show you the layout, I'll tell you why the setup's important if you go into a mock draft. And then there's all this other information. Don't deal with these here. I mean, you want to see all players available. 3rd round reversal is nonsense, but that tells you it resets around the 3rd round. Most leagues don't. And don't do alphabetical sort. You want them to be sorted by ADP, and I'll tell you what that means later. Now, I'm going to go to roster settings. Oops, I did something wrong here. You're supposed to hit update, so I'm going to hit. You're supposed to hit this button, update here, but I'll hit save. So then all that information that I just put in. So that was general settings. Now I'm clicking on roster settings. I want to see that this reflects what I have in my league. In my league, my flex league, I'll probably have 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. I have something called a super flex, but I don't have a kicker. I don't have a defense. All right, and add a missing position. This is where you can look at it. So let's say you have another extra flex, you can add it in there, or you can subtract it. But if you need something like I do, a super flex, look in there and add it. All right, I deleted kicker and defense. Maybe it doesn't show up there. You can do that. Oh my goodness, this has defensive position players. That's a crazy league. Okay, but I'll add this flex in as well for my quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end. That's my super flex league where I play 2 QBs. This is just me setting up my league. So you want to make sure that you got the correct starting roster spots and full roster spots when you look at the board. So I'll hit update on that. Now, let's get out of this draft order. If you know where everyone's drafting, but let's not talk about that right now. Now, why did I set those things up before I jumped in here? I want it to kind of look like what you're going to see on draft night. Okay? Doing those scoring formats, all right, PPR, non-PPR, standard, this whole little board of players, it'll shuffle people around. And I want you to see what that will look like if the value of players are different because of scoring. Now, roster spots. Why did I do that in here to show you the room? Because I wanted to show you your roster positions and where you can find those things on the draft board on draft night. Okay? So, let's just talk about the board here. I'm going to hit this little down arrow. Now, this is the draft board. You see these little arrows? They mean something. So this is a 12-team league, and I always do this, but the 12th team's always off the screen here. But the arrows show you it's a snake draft. You see how it goes one way? Then we have a down arrow. Then it comes back over here. So the first team that has the number one pick in the first round doesn't get the number one pick in the second round. Okay, that's the old linear draft, things that you see in the NFL, NBA, on normal rookie drafts in real life. All right, that doesn't matter in fantasy, because in fantasy we want a fair lineup, because we're reconstructing our teams from scratch mostly if you do a redraft league, which is the most popular setup out there. So you see he has a 1.1. What's 1.1 mean? First round, then you got the period. Second number means the pick. So he's got the 101, as some people say, the first round, first pick. Okay, and it keeps going in there. Team 5's got 1.5. Makes sense until you get to the second round. So this guy, just believe me, it says 1.12. So he's got the 12th pick in the first round. He starts the second round, all right? And it will reflect saying 2.1. That means he's got the first pick in the second round. And it goes all the way down. You see how these numbers change every other round from the second number? All right, so the first number is the round, first round, second round, third round, fourth round, fifth round. Second number is telling you the pick in that round. Just need to know where you're picking, because it matters when you start picking players. Now, bringing back the pool of players, let's talk about the icons that you see. In most places on the very far left, this little plus arrow, that's what you click when you want to draft a player. Don't click on the name. All right, you're looking for something that shows add or a plus sign. That's how you know I'm picking it. Now, we'll talk about how you can practice and make sure you hit the right icons depending on what platform you're on. But you're looking, that's the add, okay? These are the ranks, okay? The first best player, second best player, third, fourth, fifth. The awesome part about this, if you know nothing about football rosters and players, you know very little, you just want to be part of the action, and you want to just pick the best team because you want to be part of the office talk at the work league. You just have to go by these rankings, and as people get picked, the next player bumps up. So always at the top, you're going to see the best player available. Now, sometimes you can accidentally hit something that'll mess it up, but you should see a little underneath rank and stuff. It goes from the top to the bottom. From there, you go and see the player's name. You might not know their names, but what's important is their position. In places on different platforms, you'll see the position with like two letters: running back, quarterback. All right, this one's a running back, and it gives a little color indication. If I switch to a quarterback, or just scroll down, Chris, so they can see it. All right, quarterback's got a red icon. A blue icons for wide receivers. There's going to be the letters that tell you what position they play, and usually a color that kind of helps you visually see that all these are quarterbacks or running backs. And this is just all best available. Now, when you go to position, it'll just give you all the quarterbacks. If I click on QB, all the QBs, so you can toggle per position. And remember talking about that roster stuff? This will help fill in your starting spots. It tells you start one quarterback. Doesn't mean that you only have one QB on your roster. This is help remind you that you need one QB in your starting spot. You need two starting running backs. You need two starting wide receivers. So when you draft, you're trying to draft what you think is going to be the best team from day one. And you can't usually win leagues in the draft, but you can lose leagues in the draft if you start just going after one position for 5 rounds and then you miss out on great tight ends and great wide receivers because you weren't paying attention to your roster lineup and that you've already drafted that position. So it's important to look at those numbers, and any platform, they should show you that. All right, so that kind of helps out. When you click on them, you can see just running backs, but it also tells you how many players you picked. Now, when it comes to the running backs, to the player, let's go back to the all board, you're going to see things like ADP, average draft position. The numbers go from a pure 1 to a lot of little 2 something, 3 little fractional numbers, decimal numbers here, because it's a consensus pick. That consensus that helps bring up what the average draft position is. That's what ADP stands for, and it's extremely important. Does not mean 2.4 does not mean I'm going to get, Christian McCaffrey at the 2.4 spot here, second round, 4th pick. No, that means as they're all the mock drafts and rankings, whatever they use to make this consensus, all right, he's the second best player. And then it's just fractional points, because when you start getting to some nitty gritty like Dalvin Cook and Cooper Kupp, people consider them the 5th best player, but Dalvin Cook is slightly better in this type of scoring format than Cooper Kupp. All right, if you just go by consensus rankings, that'll be easier, but ADP is extremely important as well. And then bye weeks. There used to be the old adage, you don't want too many players on the same bye week. So bye week means that team takes off for the season. So if you didn't know that, every team has a bye week, and that means that they don't play. If your lineup has a lot of week 14 bye weeks, you're probably going to lose on week 14 because you got a lot of players in your lineup that can't play that day. That's their off week. So you want to pay attention to that. Other little things that you need to know are indicators of injuries or suspensions. So they'll look like something like a red letter. All right, like I'll click on CeeDee Lamb. So QUES, what's that mean? Questionable. There's an injury tag on this player. Click on it. It's going to bring you up what's going on. All right, he's questionable. What's he questionable for? Oh, if you look on here, read through this thing, he's got a toe injury, but it doesn't look serious. So that means he's still a draftable player. Now, if you see something that says like out or injured reserve, IR, that means they're out for a long period of time, and you might not want to risk it. Let's say like Deshaun Watson this year, 11 games. When I see out and it shows me 11 games in this little write-up, I don't want to draft him because he won't be available. Now, most websites will kind of adjust that in the rankings for you, but you need to know. A player like, let's look at suspensions. All right. Oh, actually, no. Type that in. Hopkins. He's a guy that's suspended for the first part of the year. All right. It's going to come up SUS. He's not injured. He's just suspended, serving for whatever it might be. You can read about it in here. Sometimes it's updated. If you can't, just go Google that player's name. Find out how many games he's suspended for before you draft him. That will help you out. There's, not take the risk out of picking players that are injured or suspended. Now, when you look for who you've drafted, you can usually click on icons like this, move my face out. Well, I'll leave my face there. You can see who you picked. If I pick the running back, it's going to fill in spots. And then if I pick more running backs, and I've already taken up a lot of positions here, it's going to fill the bench. It's going to show you who you filled out. There's something called a queue. I don't advise this, but that's just like little icons like this that add things over there. That's if you want to say, hey, I want to watch this player for another round, but I'm not going to pick him right now. Just leave him there. But if you're just starting the draft, don't use a queue. Use these icons that I've discussed here. Allow the rankings and the automatic updates of the big board help you pick best players available. You do that and also watch how many times or how many starting spots you've filled and try to be fair amongst everything. All right? You're going to be great. You're going to be just fine to have this as your first draft if you're coming in with no knowledge of fantasy football. All right, guys, now we're to the last part. We've looked at scoring. We've seen how our roster's set up. Now we visited the draft room. You got to do a little bit of prep, but you don't want to get overwhelmed. If you have days or weeks before your draft, you've got some time to prep. And here are a couple of things that I think could be really easy for you to prep drafting. So I'm going back here to mock drafts. Now, reason why I wanted you to visit this, because you can kind of see this ahead of time. But go back to that draft room. You go in here and you finally go down to, draft settings. You've done everything, the scoring, the roster, all that stuff that I showed you before. All right, you got to click this Start Draft button, and it'll help you learn how to pick the players, how to actually see these things in real time. So if I click on Start Draft here, I'm going to hit OK. It gives you a little pause. For some reason, that's where the position that I picked. And you see players starting to get picked up here, and you see this little line. It tells you projected, spots. This is how you want to prepare for your draft. Now look, on this yellow block on my name, it's got a click timer. That's telling me how much time I have to make my pick. All right. Now, if I'm going to learn how to draft, I'm going to look down here and I'll say, hey, remember that plus icon I talked about when we were looking at the draft room? Now it's open. It's actually live. I'm going to say I'm going to pick Dalvin Cook at the 108. I'm going to check in here. He's got no injury icons here. His rank and his ADP seems just on par with for the 6th pick. So I'm going to hit the plus sign, and boom. I'm so sorry. That thing is loud right now. But that's how you start mock drafting. You can see where other players are being picked. So if you know your draft position, move it around. But you can look at it and say, man, all right, these guys get drafted early for receivers. A lot of running backs go off in this draft with this type of scoring and this type of, roster construction. That's where it matters. So you just keep around and just keep choosing players. You'll see the rosters. See Dalvin Cook pops up here. And now you know how the draft's going to feel like. Now I'm going to exit out of this one. I don't really need to, do anything with it anymore. You can end it or delete it. I'm going to just delete it. But for the mock draft, I want to go, that's probably one of the best things to learn how to draft and see how the value changes in your scoring formats per the player that gets picked. Knowing where players are going to get picked helps you value them on draft day. On draft day, you have the human element. Here, it's a CPU, use an ADP, and whatever little formula they have to dictate who should be picked at that round. People don't think like computers. They think with their homers, they want their players from their favorite team, or they might have their own strategy. So it's good to show you what to expect, but it's never going to go just like your mock drafts. So from mocking, you really need to go read or listen to some stuff. And I think reading is probably the easiest to see for first-time people, because you can look at it and consume it at your own speed. Listen to somebody, you might be like, whoa, you're using too much different little language. I have no idea. ESPN. Let me go switch this website here. It's free. Most of the stuff is free. That's why I choose it. Fantasy Pros, the fantasy footballers. Check our last video about how the top 5 things we use to prep for our fantasy drafts. But ESPN and Yahoo and some other leagues like that, or other websites like that, has some pretty free stuff. So if I'm coming in here, I'm looking at this top bar and I see fantasy, I'm just going to click on it and let it toggle down. There's so many different type of fantasy leagues for different sports, but I'm going to go back over here to football. And this is where I can go straight to fantasy advice from ESPN people. Okay. When I go on here, I'm looking for stuff that can help me know what's going on currently, or just hearing experts, talk about how they draft, who they like. This is where you can find all of it. Just start reading this stuff. Some of these things, ESPN Plus is a paid thing, but there's free stuff going on here. All right. The 192 players who should be rostered. I think if I don't know what I'm doing in a draft day, I might look at that so I can get familiar with some of the names. All right. Insights from, NFL reporters. It helps build up that you got some type of knowledge. So when you're talking to the other guys in the draft, they know, hey, he kind of knows what's going on. He's not going to be someone that's going to mess up the draft. He actually prepared. And then you can look at all these little kits. You got draft kits that gives you cheat sheets and all this other stuff that you can use to prepare for your draft. So you just keep scrolling down. All right. And I'm going to click on things like the draft kit. All right. They've got little videos that'll pop up. Make sure it doesn't actually play in the background. Okay. All right. So reading things. seeing experts' analysis and like suggestions and their pearls of wisdom, that's important. It kind of helps shape your mind a little bit, so you're not just going in cold turkey. All right, you're like, okay, I know how to use the draft room, but I really don't know anything of what's going on. This will help you. Check on it a couple of times, once a day maybe, leading up to the draft, so you are caught up on the latest news. Injuries are a huge thing, suspensions, all this little tidbits could really affect your draft. Now, a cheat sheet central. You click on something like this that's hyperlinked, it's going to pop up and show you, hey, this is our, PPR top 300 sheet. Here's another one that says beginners fantasy football PPR cheat sheet. That might be something you want to download because it'll help you walk through it. It'll have other scoring formats, non-PPR, that's the standard. Even for a half-point PPR, you can still use a regular points per reception cheat sheet. So let's click on something for like the beginners, a little download, and you're going to get some. This is printable, nice. It lays out a pretty good PDF if you want to print this, but it tells you, hey, these are positions of players, and these are rounds that we're expected them to go. And if you want to go old school pencil or pen on paper, all right, it allows you to do that. I advise that too, because sometimes guys bring tons of laptops. Who knows what house, if you go a live draft, how great their Wi-Fi is, or while you're drafting people here, you might want to just kind of take notes to keep, of what's going on, highlight players that, you were looking for ahead of time, so you can kind of track what rounds or where to pick them. So you can create a cheat sheet. Or you don't create, you go find someone else who created a cheat sheet for you, and this just helps you with ranking. You see all this on the draft room, all right, in the mock drafts, but sometimes you don't want to keep scrolling things and mess up your pick. You want something else on a different window on your computer or a hard sheet in your hand to see and follow players as they get picked. So a cheat sheet's a great way to get ready. So I hope this helped. Might be a lot of information here, but everything from understanding your league scoring and lineup format and visiting the draft room to get used to how all the icons and all the little things in the draft room is going to be on draft night is a huge help to you. Mock drafting, prepping for your draft. Mock draft will get you a little familiar with how players get picked and how the whole draft will run. That's extremely important. And then do as much prep work ahead of time, little bite sizes. Don't overwhelm yourself, all right? But hopefully this helps you and gets you guys ready for your first fantasy football draft.